He did not know that a single act of kindness tonight would change both of their lives forever. The wind cut through the narrow streets of Manhattan like a blade, snow falling steadily and coating the sidewalks in a soft, cold blanket. Ethan Cole, a young, struggling artist with paint-stained hands and a threadbare coat, shivered as he stepped out of his small studio, clutching his worn leather sketchbook tightly against his chest. His shoes were soaked from the melting snow, and every breath he exhaled clouded in the icy night air. As he walked past the illuminated gallery, golden light spilling onto the sidewalk, he noticed a young woman trembling against the gallery door, her scarf barely covering her shoulders. Her face was pale, lips chapped, and eyes wide with surprise and unease. Without thinking twice, Ethan removed his only thick jacket and draped it carefully over her shoulders, his fingers brushing against her trembling hands. She looked up at him, startled, unsure whether to speak or flee. The snowflakes clung to their hair, the cold biting, yet in that frozen moment there was an unexpected warmth between them, a spark of human connection that transcended the biting night. Ethan muttered a soft apology, his voice almost drowned by the gusts of wind, explaining he hoped she would not freeze, though he did not expect any response. The woman adjusted the jacket, and for a moment, their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between two strangers in a city that usually moved too fast to notice such gestures. Before continuing, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you cannot miss. Ethan stepped back, watching her wrap the coat tightly around herself, and for the first time that evening, he allowed himself a small smile. He did not know that Vivian Harper, the owner of the gallery and a millionaire who rarely left her luxurious penthouse, had been observing him from inside the warm light of the gallery, hidden behind a frosted window. She watched his gesture, her heart stirring in ways she had not felt in years. The way he had hesitated only a fraction of a second, the care in his hands, and the absolute lack of expectation for reward or recognition. It fascinated her. Ethan turned to leave, thinking his good deed unnoticed, while Vivian lingered. Near the window, captivated, already intrigued by the humanity in a man who had so little. Snow swirled around them, the cold of the night contrasting sharply with the golden warmth spilling from the gallery. The scene seemed suspended in time, the ordinary street suddenly charged with the tension of fate, hinting that this was only the beginning of something neither of them could yet comprehend. The cold of the night lingered in Ethan Cole's bones as he trudged back to his cramped studio, the snow crunching under his worn sneakers with every step. The streets were nearly deserted now, the hum of traffic from a few distant cars barely audible above the whispering wind. Inside his small apartment, the air smelled faintly of old paint and turpentine, a reminder of countless nights spent hunched over canvases, trying to capture a world far more beautiful than the one he could afford to live in. He kicked off his soaked shoes and peeled off his wet layers, letting them fall into the corner where his jackets and shirts had been piled haphazardly. His gaze wandered over the small collection of paintings stacked against the walls, some leaning precariously, others still damp from yesterday's work. The jacket he had given away weighed on his mind, but not because of the cold or discomfort, rather because of the fleeting connection it had created, a thread of warmth in a city that often felt indifferent. Ethan sank into the rickety chair by his drafting table, hands clasping the sketchbook he carried everywhere. He thought of the girl outside the gallery, the way her lips had parted slightly, her eyes wide with surprise and an innocence he had not seen in a long time. There was something hauntingly familiar in her expression, a vulnerability that stirred memories of his younger sister back home in Vermont, the one he had been separated from when life had pulled him into the city to pursue art. He shook his head, trying to focus on the present, yet the image of her framed by the golden glow of the gallery window would not leave him. Ethan poured himself a cup of tepid coffee from the chipped mug he kept on his desk and inhaled the bitter aroma, letting it anchor him to the moment. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rattling the windows as if echoing the restless pulse in his chest. He thought about the harshness of life, the endless rejections at galleries and exhibitions, and the constant struggle to make ends meet. Yet, beneath the fatigue and disappointment, there was a quiet pride that he had acted without expectation, that his small gesture had been genuine and uncalculating. Meanwhile, Vivian Harper, standing in the warmth of the gallery she owned, could not stop thinking about the young man who had given his only warm jacket without a second thought. She had watched him, hidden behind the frosted window, and a peculiar mix of admiration and curiosity had rooted her to the spot. Vivian had seen many acts of charity in her life, many people offering assistance out of obligation or with a silent expectation, but what Ethan had done was different. It was raw, it was authentic, and it had pierced through the layers of sophistication and distance she usually maintained around strangers. She paced the gallery quietly, her heels clicking softly on the polished hardwood floors, considering the irony that someone so ordinary, so unaware of the privileges and power she wielded, had imparted a moment of real humanity to her night. Her mind raced with questions. Who was he? Where did he live? Could someone so modest and sincere truly exist in a world filled with calculation and performance? The night wore on, and both of them remained in their respective spaces, connected by the invisible thread of that brief encounter. Ethan, wrapped in the warmth of his modest studio, sketched aimlessly, the lines on the page echoing the swirl of snow and the flicker of golden light he had seen reflected on her coat. Vivian, surrounded by wealth and luxury, found herself contemplating the vulnerability she seldom allowed herself to acknowledge, the curiosity pushing her to find him, to understand him. Neither knew what the next day would bring, but both sensed, with an almost unexplainable certainty, that their lives had shifted in the span of a few minutes outside the gallery, and that this small act of compassion might be the beginning of something neither of them could yet fully comprehend. The morning light filtered weakly through the cracked blinds of Ethan Cole's tiny studio, casting a pale glow over his cluttered workspace. Paint brushes lay scattered across the table, some stiff with dried paint, and canvases leaned against every wall, some half-finished, others abandoned in frustration. The smell of turpentine and cold coffee mingled in the air, an aroma that had become almost comforting over the years despite the hardships it represented. Ethan stretched his stiff muscles, his back aching from hours hunched over sketching in the dim light of a single lamp the night before. He glanced at the empty chair across from his desk, and for a moment wished someone would be there, someone to share the small victories and silent defeats that marked each day. Today, like many days before, he would take his canvases to the local art fair a few blocks from his studio, hoping for at least one person to notice his work, to give him a scrap of encouragement, or maybe even a sale that would cover a week of rent. The walk was brisk, the snow from the previous night melting underfoot, leaving a slick layer of slush that soaked through the soles of his worn shoes. The thought of the girl outside the gallery the night before lingered, her eyes wide with surprise, her hands clutching the jacket he had given her. He wondered if she had made it home safely, whether she remembered the small gesture, and how such a fleeting moment could carry such weight. Across town, Vivian Harper moved through her penthouse, the view of the city stretching out endlessly below her, a sea of rooftops and streets glistening with the morning frost. She had not been able to shake the image of the young artist, the way he had acted with no expectation of reward or recognition, and the sincerity in his eyes had unsettled her in a way that few people ever had. She poured herself a cup of tea, the steam rising like a reminder of warmth, and thought about the contrast between her own insulated world and the vulnerability she had witnessed outside her gallery. Her assistant knocked lightly, interrupting her reverie, and she asked casually if there had been any new exhibitions or promising talent spotted. Vivian smiled faintly, keeping her thoughts to herself, but her mind continued to wander back to that single act of kindness. Both Ethan and Vivian, separated by blocks and social distance, were tethered to the same memory, a moment suspended in the cold night that neither could quite forget, a quiet spark that hinted at the possibility of their worlds intersecting in ways that would challenge both their expectations and their understanding of connection. Vivian Harper sat at her large oak desk in the gallery office, the sunlight streaming through the tall windows reflecting off the polished floors. In front of her lay a small pile of sketchbooks and notes she had gathered over the years, reminders of the countless artists who had walked through her gallery doors seeking recognition. Yet none of them had left the impression that Ethan Cole had made. She remembered the way he had held himself outside the gallery the night before, his coat thin and worn, his eyes scanning the street with quiet vigilance before he offered her warmth without hesitation or expectation. The memory of his hands brushing against hers when he draped the jacket over her shoulders lingered, an unexpected intimacy that she could not ignore. Vivian leaned back in her chair and allowed herself a moment of reflection, considering how different this man was from the typical artists she encountered, many of whom were eager to impress or manipulate for exposure or favor. There was a raw authenticity in Ethan that fascinated her, a purity of gesture she had almost forgotten existed in the world of high art and commerce. Across the city, Ethan had returned to his studio after the morning at the art fair, weary but restless. He could not shake the image of the young woman, her expression caught between surprise and gratitude, and the warmth of the coat around her shoulders. He unpacked a fresh canvas and attempted to capture the memory of that fleeting moment in strokes of charcoal and watercolor, his hands moving with a focus that momentarily erased the fatigue of his long day. Each line was an attempt to preserve the feeling of connection, the sense that two lives had brushed against each other in a meaningful way, even if only for a brief instant. The light from his small lamp flickered across the page, highlighting the contrast between the shadows and the delicate impressions of snow that he tried to render. Ethan paused occasionally, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug, letting the aroma anchor him to the quiet solitude of the studio. His mind wandered back to the crowded streets, the indifferent passers-by, and the small human moment that had interrupted the monotony of the city. He wondered if she had returned home safely, whether she had thought about him, or whether he had simply been another face in the cold night that would soon be forgotten. Vivian, meanwhile, walked slowly through the gallery halls, her heels clicking softly against the marble, a gentle hum of classical music filling the space. She paused in front of one of her favorite paintings, a large cityscape she had acquired from a local artist, and imagined Ethan standing there, capturing the light and the shadows with the same care he had shown outside the gallery. She thought about the possibilities that had been set in motion by such a simple gesture, the way one act of kindness could ripple outward, influencing decisions and relationships in ways neither of them could yet understand. Vivian reached for her phone, hesitating as she considered calling him, sending a message, or simply observing from a distance until she felt the moment was right. The city outside continued its restless rhythm. Cars passing by, pedestrians hurrying to their destinations, unaware of the quiet connection forming across blocks. Both Ethan and Vivian, in their respective worlds of struggle and privilege, were caught in the same invisible thread, a subtle tension that neither could ignore, a promise that the encounter outside the gallery was only the first chapter in a story that had yet to fully unfold. The next day dawned gray and overcast, the sky heavy with clouds, as if the city itself carried the weight of the previous night. Ethan Cole stepped out of his small studio, sketchbook tucked under one arm, his worn sneakers splashing through puddles that reflected the dull light. He had barely slept, his mind still replaying the fleeting encounter outside the gallery, the way the young woman had accepted his jacket with surprise and gratitude. The streets were quieter than usual, the usual hum of morning traffic muted under the soft drizzle that had begun falling, leaving a damp chill in the air. Ethan made his way toward the local coffee shop, a small independent cafe that had become his informal office and meeting place, hoping for inspiration, or at the very least, a moment of normalcy before heading to the art fair. As he walked, he noticed the subtle signs of the city waking up, a delivery truck pulling slowly along the street, the smell of fresh bread wafting from a bakery, and a dog walker guiding a pair of energetic golden retrievers. Yet his thoughts kept returning to the woman from last night, and he could not shake the sense that their lives had intersected in a way that was meant to be more than coincidental. Meanwhile, across town, Vivian Harper sat in her gallery office, the city sprawling below her in a patchwork of streets and rooftops glistening from the early morning drizzle. She had spent the morning reviewing upcoming exhibitions, yet her attention kept drifting to the memory of Ethan, the young artist who had acted with such authenticity and selflessness. She remembered the way his eyes had met hers briefly, the quiet determination and humility that had marked him apart from the many who sought recognition for the wrong reasons. Vivian considered her options carefully, knowing that her next step would require subtlety. She could not simply approach him directly without disrupting the natural flow of events, yet she could not ignore the curiosity and intrigue that had taken root in her mind. At the art fair, Ethan arranged his sketches and canvases with meticulous care, placing those he felt most proud of at the forefront. The drizzle began to fall more steadily, droplets clinging to his hair and coat, and he could feel the cold seeping through the layers he had hastily donned that morning. Passers-by glanced at his work, some pausing to admire a particular painting, others offering polite smiles before moving on. Ethan noticed a slight figure watching from across the street, partly obscured by the awning of a nearby shop, and for a moment, his heart skipped a beat. The figure seemed familiar, though he could not place it immediately, and he shook his head, focusing on arranging his canvases as a way to steady his racing thoughts. Vivian, standing at the corner of the block, observed him discreetly from behind the glass of a boutique window. She had taken a cab to be near the fair without revealing her presence, intrigued by the man who had captured her attention so profoundly the night before. She watched his movements, the careful way he handled his work, the small gestures that revealed his character, and she felt a surge of anticipation, wondering how to approach him without startling or overwhelming him. Ethan adjusted a particularly large canvas, feeling the weight of the frame and the exhaustion in his arms, and for a moment, his eyes lifted and met a pair of observing ones from across the street. He caught a fleeting glimpse of recognition, a flash that made his heart race with the promise of connection. The rain fell steadily, a gentle percussion on the streets and rooftops, as if the city itself were holding its breath, anticipating the next movement in the quiet, unfolding story that had begun with a jacket, a snow-laden night, and a single act of kindness that neither of them could yet fully comprehend. The drizzle had slowed to a fine mist as Ethan Cole packed up the last of his canvases at the art fair, the morning's chill still lingering in the damp air. His hands were stiff from arranging the displays, and his coat clung to his back, soaked through in places, leaving him with the familiar shiver that came with the city's unpredictable weather. As he lifted the sketchbook under his arm, he noticed movement out of the corner of his eye, a figure stepping lightly across the street, her heels clicking softly against the wet pavement. It was her, the same woman from the night outside the gallery, but this time she approached with an air of quiet confidence and purpose that contrasted sharply with her trembling figure from before. Ethan froze momentarily, unsure whether to smile, nod, or pretend he had not noticed, but her eyes met his directly, and a small, almost imperceptible smile played at the corners of her lips. She stopped a few feet away, raising her hand in a subtle wave, and Ethan, finally allowing himself to react, returned it with a slight nod, his heart quickening. The woman's name was Vivian Harper, and though Ethan did not yet know her full identity, there was something undeniably compelling about the way she carried herself, a presence that drew the eye and demanded attention without a word being spoken. He felt a mixture of curiosity and apprehension as she crossed the wet street, her coat brushing against her legs, the damp air clinging to her hair. When she reached the edge of the art fair, she stopped and said in a clear, calm voice, "Hello. I'm glad we meet again." Ethan's breath caught, the familiarity of her voice and the echo of the previous night's encounter bringing a flush to his cheeks. Yes, he stammered slightly, unsure of what to say, though he gestured toward the small stack of canvases he had carried for the fair. "I did not expect to see anyone I recognized here." Vivian's eyes softened, a subtle warmth that belied her poised exterior. "I noticed your work from across the street. You handle your pieces with care," she said, her gaze sweeping over the sketches, lingering on the delicate lines and the attention to detail that revealed hours of dedication. Ethan felt a surge of pride, mingled with the usual undercurrent of self-doubt that accompanied any public display of his art. He nodded, muttering a quiet, "Thank you," unsure if he could meet her gaze for long without betraying his vulnerability. Vivian crouched slightly to examine one of the smaller sketches leaning against the table, her fingers hovering near the edge of the paper without touching it. She observed the fine lines, the subtle shading, the depth, captured in the urban landscape, and a quiet admiration reflected in her eyes. "You have a talent for noticing things others might overlook," she said, her voice carrying a note of genuine appreciation. Ethan, flushed with the recognition, felt a nervous energy bubbling beneath the surface, a mixture of excitement and uncertainty as he realized that this woman, whom he had first seen shivering under the drizzle of the night before, might be someone who could see him for who he was, rather than the tired, struggling artist the city often ignored. The mist swirled around them, clinging to their coats and hair, creating an intimate bubble of quiet in the midst of the bustling city. And for a fleeting moment, Ethan and Vivian simply stood there, observing each other, each aware of the invisible thread connecting them, a thread spun from the previous night's act of kindness, now beginning to weave a more deliberate and intricate pattern that neither could yet fully comprehend. The world moved around them, the hum of distant traffic, the faint sound of a street musician tuning his instrument, and the soft plop of raindrops from the trees lining the avenue. But within that space, there was a stillness, a pause in time that held the promise of discovery, connection, and the unfolding of a story that had begun with a single jacket and a fleeting moment of human generosity. Vivian Harper took a deep breath, straightening her posture as she stepped closer to Ethan Cole, the drizzle of the morning still clinging to her coat. Her gaze was steady, and for the first time in their encounters, she allowed herself to speak plainly, her voice calm but firm. "Ethan, there is something you should know about me," she began, the words hanging in the damp air between them. Ethan looked up, surprised at the sudden seriousness, his fingers tightening around the sketchbook under his arm. "I watched you last night," she continued, "the way you gave your coat to that young woman. It was a small gesture, but it revealed more about your character than words ever could. I need you to understand who I am, because it may change everything between us." Ethan swallowed hard, a mix of anticipation and apprehension swirling in his chest. He had sensed from her demeanor and the way she carried herself that she was not an ordinary passerby, but he had not expected such a direct admission. Vivian reached into the inside pocket of her coat and retrieved a simple business card, handing it to him with a gentle but deliberate motion. Ethan took it, eyes widening as he read the name and title printed clearly, "Vivian Harper, owner of Harper Gallery." The realization hit him with a jolt, and he struggled to find words that could convey both his astonishment and the cautious respect he felt. "You mean you own this gallery?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, his gaze flicking from the card to her eyes for confirmation. Vivian nodded, a faint smile playing at her lips. "Yes, and more than that. I have been looking for artists who create with integrity and honesty, not just for profit or recognition. Your work, and the way you acted last night, speaks to that. I wanted you to know because I believe your talent deserves a chance, and so does your heart." Ethan's mind raced, trying to reconcile the image of the poised, affluent woman standing before him with the warmth and attention she had shown. He had been trained by the harsh realities of the city to expect either judgment or indifference from people in positions of wealth and power. Yet here she was, acknowledging his actions and showing interest in him for who he was. The sounds of the city, the soft patter of the rain, the distant rumble of a delivery truck, all seemed to fade as Ethan absorbed the significance of her words. Vivian continued, her tone softer now, almost conspiratorial. "I have seen many people in my time, many who seek to impress or manipulate, but what you showed was genuine. I want to offer you an opportunity to exhibit your work in the gallery, to show the world your perspective and your craft. And I want to do it because I believe in your sincerity." Ethan felt a swell of emotion, a mixture of disbelief, gratitude, and the faintest stirrings of hope that had been dulled by years of struggle. He nodded slowly, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders, though uncertainty lingered about whether he was truly ready for the attention and expectations that would come with such an opportunity. Vivian studied him, recognizing the hesitation and the humility that had drawn her in from start. She knew that offering him this chance would change his life, but also she understood that it might redefine her own as the intersection of their worlds promised challenges and revelations yet to come. Ethan finally managed a shaky smile, glancing down at the sketchbook in his hands and then back to her. And for the first time that morning, he allowed himself to imagine a future where his work was seen, appreciated, and connected to someone who had witnessed his authenticity from the very beginning. The drizzle had lightened to a mist, but in that quiet street corner, with the city moving around them and the scent of wet asphalt in the air, a new chapter was beginning, one marked by recognition, trust, and the potential for both professional and personal discovery that neither of them could yet fully understand. Ethan Cole hesitated as he stepped through the gallery doors, the warmth of the interior immediately enveloping him in contrast to the damp chill outside. The polished wooden floors reflected the soft lighting, and the faint scent of varnish and fresh paint hung in the air, comforting and invigorating at the same time. Vivian Harper, standing nearby with an encouraging smile, gestured toward the studio space she had arranged for him, a small section of the gallery converted into a workspace where his canvases could be displayed and created. Ethan ran a hand through his damp hair, feeling a mixture of excitement and self-doubt. "This is really for me?" he asked, his voice low and tentative. Vivian nodded, her eyes steady. "Yes, I want you to have a space to create freely and the chance to show your work to people who will appreciate it for what it is, not for what they expect you to be." Ethan's chest tightened as he took in the small yet perfectly arranged area. There were tables for his supplies, easels positioned near the natural light streaming from the tall windows, and a small seating area for visitors or potential clients to view his pieces. The gallery staff moved around silently, respectful of the space she had curated for him, and Ethan felt a quiet sense of validation that he had not experienced in years. As he unpacked his canvases, Vivian observed from a short distance, noting the careful way he handled each piece, the deliberate attention to detail, and the reverence with which he treated his own work. "I know it is a lot to take in," she said softly, approaching him once he had set down a particularly large canvas. "I just want you to focus on your art and not worry about the gallery or the expectations. Your work speaks for itself, and I want you to feel supported while you create." Ethan nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. The opportunity was almost overwhelming, and yet, beneath the nervous energy, he felt a flicker of hope. He began setting up his easels and arranging his paints, brushes, and sketchbooks, the familiar rhythm calming him, grounding him in the act of creation itself. Vivian moved along the perimeter of the space, adjusting a small spotlight to illuminate a set of sketches he had laid on the table, and she could not help but notice the focus and intensity on his face. He was fully absorbed, unaware of the small gestures she made to enhance the environment around him. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of possibility rather than constraint. Outside the gallery, the city carried on its usual rhythm, the hum of traffic, the occasional honk of a horn, and the distant voices of early pedestrians filling the air. Inside, the gallery was quiet except for the faint rustle of paper and the soft scraping of brush against canvas. Vivian allowed herself to watch him for a moment, remembering the coat he had given away and the humility that had marked him even in the presence of someone so clearly established and affluent. She recognized that it was rare to find talent and character intertwined in the same person, and she felt a quiet determination to nurture both. Ethan paused to examine a canvas he had just positioned, stepping back to take in the lines and colors that captured the memory of the snowy night and the fleeting sense of connection that had begun everything. The gallery seemed to hum around him, a living space ready to embrace his creativity, and he felt a cautious optimism that this new chapter might allow him to pursue his art without compromise, guided by the subtle encouragement of someone who had already seen his best qualities before he even realized they mattered. Days passed as Ethan Cole settled into the new rhythm of working in the gallery, each morning bringing the soft light through the tall windows that illuminated his canvases and sketchbooks. The air was filled with the faint scent of paint and the subtle echo of footsteps on the polished wooden floors as gallery staff prepared for the day. Ethan found himself absorbed in creating, the sketches and colors on his canvases capturing the life and energy of the city outside, translating the movement and vibrancy into forms that seemed to breathe with his own heartbeat. Vivian Harper moved through the space quietly, observing his dedication, the careful attention he paid to every line, every brushstroke, and the deliberate way he adjusted the composition of each piece until it met his exacting standards. The gallery had begun to notice his presence as well, with a few visitors stopping by, intrigued by the energy in his work, offering polite compliments or lingering to ask questions about his process. Yet, despite these small signs of interest, there were murmurs among a few local artists who frequented the gallery, whispers questioning whether Ethan had received undue advantage because of his connection to the owner. Ethan caught glimpses of their skepticism, the subtle side glances, and the barely audible comments that hinted at envy or disbelief. A pang of doubt crept in, a reminder that the world often judged talent not by its merit, but by perceived access or privilege. He tried to focus on his art, letting the rhythm of creation wash over him. But the whispers lingered in the corners of his mind, reminding him that acceptance and recognition were fragile and often contingent. Vivian, sensing the tension, approached him quietly, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Do not let their words shake your focus," she said softly, her tone carrying authority and encouragement. "They do not see your work as it truly is, nor do they see the honesty in your actions. Remember why you create, not who watches." Ethan nodded, drawing in a steadying breath, allowing her presence to anchor him, giving him the courage to continue despite the murmurs around the gallery. The day progressed, and visitors came and went, some stopping to engage with Ethan about his sketches, others merely observing, their expressions a mix of curiosity and admiration. Each interaction, however brief, reinforced his confidence and reminded him of the significance of being seen for what he truly was. Meanwhile, Vivian continued to monitor the gallery discreetly, noting who engaged sincerely with his work and who spoke merely out of social obligation or envy. She understood that exposure brought scrutiny, and she intended to shield Ethan from unnecessary negativity while allowing his art to speak for itself. As the afternoon sun began to filter through the windows, casting a golden glow across the gallery floor, Ethan paused to step back from his latest piece, a detailed sketch capturing the interplay of light and shadow on a bustling street corner. He allowed himself a small smile, a quiet acknowledgement of progress, and the validation that came not from accolades, but from the act of creation itself. Vivian approached again, this time with a gentle suggestion to arrange a small exhibition of his work in a side gallery, an opportunity that would allow a wider audience to experience his talent while maintaining the intimate atmosphere that suited him best. Ethan's eyes widened at the proposal, a mixture of excitement and apprehension bubbling within him. Yet he felt a renewed sense of purpose and the subtle thrill of anticipation for what this new chapter could bring. In the quiet corners of the gallery, amid the scent of paint and the hum of the city beyond the windows, both Ethan and Vivian recognized the delicate balance between opportunity and challenge, support and independence, and the unfolding promise of a partnership that could nurture both his talent and the growing connection between them, all built on a single act of kindness that had started it all. Rumors began circulating quietly through the local art community, subtle whispers carried from one gallery visitor to another, questioning whether Ethan Cole had earned his new opportunities through merit or because of his connection to Vivian Harper. It started with a polite comment overheard by a friend at a small cafe, a suggestion that perhaps the gallery owner had played favorites or that the young artist had received assistance he did not deserve. By mid-morning, the whispers had evolved into small conversations among a few of the artists who frequented the gallery, their voices low but filled with skepticism. Ethan, setting up his canvases and preparing for the day's visitors, noticed the sideways glances and the barely concealed murmurs, each one planting a seed of doubt and self-consciousness in his mind. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted a canvas, the familiar rhythm of his work no longer comforting, replaced instead by the gnawing uncertainty of how he was perceived. Vivian, moving through the gallery to check on the arrangements and upcoming visitors, observed the tension with a practiced eye. She had anticipated scrutiny, but had not expected it to manifest so subtly and insidiously, the quiet judgments that could erode confidence even in those who were talented and sincere. She approached Ethan with deliberate calm, placing a hand on his shoulder and speaking in a measured tone that conveyed both authority and reassurance. "Do not let the doubts of others dictate your sense of worth," she said gently. "They have not seen the sincerity in your work or the integrity in your actions. Focus on what you create, not on what they think you should be." Ethan nodded, his eyes downcast for a moment, drawing a slow breath to steady himself. He realized that the murmurs, while unsettling, were also a reflection of the significance of the opportunity he had been given, the visibility that came with displaying his work in a prominent gallery. The day unfolded with a series of small interactions, each visitor offering varying levels of interest and engagement. Some paused to admire the precision in his sketches, the careful layering of colors, and the subtle attention to detail that brought his urban landscapes to life. Others questioned the sudden prominence of his work, the way his pieces had been positioned in the gallery, and the ease with which he navigated the space now afforded to him. Throughout the day, Ethan moved with measured focus, allowing his art to communicate where words might fail, each stroke a declaration of dedication and authenticity. Vivian watched him from across the room, noting the way his concentration deepened, how he adjusted his canvases and tools with care, and how, despite the whispers and side comments, he continued to create with the same honesty she had first recognized outside the gallery. She knew that trust and confidence would take time to grow, both for Ethan and for those around him, and she intended to support him through the scrutiny, shielding his process from unnecessary negativity while letting the work itself speak. By late afternoon, the murmurs had begun to settle, some visitors leaving with quiet admiration, others lingering to engage in genuine conversation about technique and inspiration. Ethan paused, stepping back to examine a completed sketch of a snow-laden street corner, the details precise, the light captured with a delicate subtlety that reflected both his talent and his resilience. Vivian approached, a soft smile on her face, and nodded toward the piece. "This is your voice," she said, her words carrying the weight of recognition and affirmation. "Do not let anyone take that from you. You create not for them, but for the honesty of what you see and feel." Ethan exhaled, a tension releasing from his shoulders as he allowed himself to feel the validation and support that came not from accolades or approval, but from the acknowledgement of someone who had witnessed both his integrity and his talent. In that quiet moment, surrounded by canvases, brushes, and the muted hum of the city outside, the fragile threads of trust, respect, and understanding began to weave between artist and gallery owner, creating a foundation that would support both the unfolding career and the tentative, yet undeniable, connection growing between them. The gallery had quieted for the evening, the last visitors leaving with gentle murmurs of appreciation and polite farewells, leaving Ethan Cole and Vivian Harper alone among the rows of canvases and easels. The soft glow of the overhead lights reflected off the polished floors, casting long shadows that moved with the rhythm of the room. Ethan stood near one of the larger canvases, stepping back to examine it, his hands slightly trembling with a mixture of fatigue and satisfaction. Vivian approached silently, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor, and she stopped a few feet away, allowing him a moment to take in his own work. The evening air outside had cooled, and the gallery windows were fogged with condensation, the city lights blurred into a soft haze beyond the glass. Vivian's voice broke the quiet, gentle and deliberate. "You have created something remarkable, Ethan. Not just the paintings, but the way you have poured yourself into them, without concern for how others might judge or misunderstand you. Ethan exhaled slowly, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips, yet his gaze remained focused on the canvas before him. "It has been overwhelming at times," he admitted quietly, "all of the attention, the whispers, the scrutiny. I never expected to be in this position or to feel so exposed." Vivian nodded, moving closer, her presence calm yet grounding. "And yet you have remained true to yourself, even when the world sought to define you by what they thought you should be. That is why your work resonates, why it holds the power to move people." Ethan's thoughts drifted back to the night he had offered his coat, to the moment when their lives had first intersected. It had been a small, almost instinctive act, yet it set into motion a series of events that neither of them had anticipated. He had never expected to find himself here, standing in a gallery filled with his own creations, with someone who had seen the depth of his character from the very beginning. Vivian gestured toward a nearby easel, where a fresh sketch, still damp with paint, captured the scene of a snow-laden street corner, the golden glow of a distant gallery window reflected in the puddles on the ground. "This one," she said softly, "is special. It carries the memory of that night, the start of everything, and it shows your heart in a way that words never could." Ethan felt a warmth rise in his chest, a quiet acknowledgement of the connection that had begun with a simple act of generosity. He allowed himself to look up at Vivian, meeting her gaze directly for the first time without the barrier of distance or hesitation. There was a shared understanding in that look, an unspoken recognition that their lives had changed, intertwined now through circumstance, choice, and the sincerity of their actions. Outside the gallery, the city carried on, indifferent yet alive, the distant hum of traffic and the occasional murmur of late pedestrians forming a backdrop to the intimate moment unfolding within. Ethan stepped closer to the easel, observing the details he had captured, the interplay of light and shadow, the subtle nuances that gave life to the scene. Vivian moved beside him, her shoulder brushing lightly against his as she examined the work, and the proximity brought a quiet thrill, an awareness of the bond that had grown between them. The gallery felt like a sanctuary, a place where talent and character were nurtured, where authenticity was recognized and celebrated. As they lingered, talking softly about the pieces, their inspirations, and the experiences that had shaped them, a mutual respect and understanding deepened, forming the foundation for trust and companionship. The evening light dimmed further the golden glow from the windows, casting a gentle radiance across the floor, and in that moment, both Ethan and Vivian sensed the subtle shift in their relationship. It was no longer merely artist and gallery owner. It had become something more profound, a connection forged through shared experiences, recognition of character, and the quiet understanding that the journey they had begun together held possibilities beyond either of their expectations. The grand opening of the exhibition arrived with a quiet excitement that filled the gallery, the polished floors reflecting the warm light from the overhead fixtures and the soft murmur of early guests discussing the artwork. Ethan Cole moved among the canvases, adjusting easels and ensuring each painting was presented to its best advantage, his hands steady despite the underlying tension he felt. Today was more than a showcase of his work. It was a culmination of months of dedication, vulnerability, and the courage to step into a world that had often seemed closed to him. Vivian Harper, observing from near the entrance, felt a surge of pride as she watched him navigate the space with quiet confidence, his attention to detail and passion for his art evident in every movement. The guests began to arrive, a mix of art enthusiasts, collectors, and a few familiar local artists, each drawn to the gallery by curiosity, reputation, or genuine interest. Whispers of anticipation and admiration floated through the rooms, the conversations punctuated by the occasional camera shutter as someone captured an image of a particular piece. Ethan's heart raced as he moved through the crowd, greeting visitors with polite nods, his voice carrying the explanations of the inspirations behind his work, the stories captured in brushstrokes and sketches. Vivian approached him gently, resting a hand lightly on his arm. "You have captivated them, Ethan," she said softly, her eyes reflecting both pride and affection. Ethan exhaled, a mix of relief and disbelief washing over him. He had feared judgment, skepticism, and failure. Yet here, in the warmth of the gallery, his creations spoke for themselves, resonating with those who viewed them. As the evening progressed, one painting in particular drew attention, a sketch of a snowy street corner, illuminated by the golden glow of a distant gallery window, capturing the memory of the night when their story had begun. Guests lingered, admiring the delicate interplay of light and shadow, the careful attention to detail, and the emotional depth embedded in the scene. Vivian watched Ethan observe their reactions, a quiet smile spreading across her face as he realized that the act of creation, the authenticity of his work, had transcended the murmurs and skepticism of before. Later, when the gallery had quieted and most visitors had departed, Ethan stood near the central canvas, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. Vivian approached once more, offering him a small envelope. "Open it," she said, her tone gentle but insistent. Inside was a simple invitation, an elegant card announcing the gallery's intention to feature his work in a special exhibition and to continue supporting his future projects. Ethan's eyes widened, and a warm flush spread across his face. He looked up at Vivian, gratitude and wonder evident in his expression. "I do not know what to say," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. Vivian smiled, reaching out to touch his hand briefly. "You do not need to say anything. Your art and your honesty have said more than words ever could. This is my commitment to you and to the potential I see in both your talent and your character." The gallery, now quiet and bathed in soft golden light, seemed to hold its breath as they stood together, the weight of the evening settling into a moment of quiet triumph. For Ethan, it was the culmination of struggle, resilience, and the courage to remain authentic despite challenges. For Vivian, it was the affirmation of her belief in the power of integrity and the subtle, transformative force of witnessing genuine kindness. In that shared space, surrounded by canvases that told stories both real and imagined, both artist and gallery owner recognized that the night was a turning point, the payoff of small gestures and enduring dedication, a celebration of creativity, humanity, and the promise of what could flourish when talent was nurtured with understanding and care. The gallery had finally emptied, leaving Ethan Cole and Vivian Harper alone in the soft, golden glow of the overhead lights. The canvases around them seemed to hum with the energy of the evening, the stories captured in paint and charcoal lingering in the quiet space. Ethan stepped back from a large sketch, his hands still slightly trembling from the mixture of excitement and exhaustion, and turned to Vivian with a hesitant smile. She returned his gaze, her eyes reflecting the pride and admiration that had grown steadily over the past days. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice steady, "I have been meaning to tell you something more, something I hope will make the moment complete." Ethan's heart quickened, uncertainty mingling with anticipation. "I am listening," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, though his eyes were fixed firmly on hers. Vivian reached in her coat pocket and retrieved a small, carefully wrapped envelope. She handed it to him with a gentle but deliberate motion. Ethan accepted it, his fingers brushing hers briefly, and carefully opened the package. Inside was a handwritten note, elegant in script, expressing not only her admiration for his talent, but also her personal recognition of his courage, integrity, and generosity, the qualities that had first drawn her attention the night he had given his coat. Alongside the note was an invitation, formal yet warm, to become an official featured artist in the gallery, with a long-term opportunity to display his work in a dedicated section and participate in upcoming exhibitions. Ethan read each word carefully, feeling the weight of the gesture and the genuine care behind it. He looked up at Vivian, a mixture of disbelief, gratitude, and a quiet joy reflected in his eyes. "This is more than I ever imagined," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I do not know how to thank you for believing in me." Vivian stepped closer, her presence both comforting and grounding. "You do not need to thank me," she said. "I only needed to acknowledge what I had already seen, that your heart and your art are remarkable. You have earned this through your actions, your dedication, and your authenticity." Ethan felt a warmth spread through his chest, a sense of resolution that had eluded him for years in the harsh, judgmental world outside the gallery. The moments of doubt, the whispers of skepticism, and the sleepless nights spent questioning his worth now seemed distant, replaced by the clarity of recognition and the promise of growth. Vivian's hand brushed against his again, lighter this time, a subtle invitation rather than a gesture of instruction. He understood without words, a silent acknowledgement passing between them that the connection they had formed went beyond professional support. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, cars passing, streetlights flickering as evening turned to night, but inside the gallery there was a quiet permanence, a sense that this chapter of their lives had reached a satisfying and meaningful conclusion. Ethan smiled fully now, his gaze meeting Vivian's with a newfound confidence and a shared understanding of the journey they had undertaken together. The gallery, once merely a space for art, had become a sanctuary of trust, recognition, and potential. In the stillness, Ethan and Vivian allowed themselves a brief moment of quiet celebration, knowing that both his future and the bond they had cultivated had been solidified. The act of giving a simple jacket on a snowy night had unfolded into a story of recognition, opportunity, and human connection, and in that shared understanding, both knew that the path ahead, though uncertain, was illuminated by the courage, kindness, and authenticity that had brought them together.